Welcome to our final main stage session for Upswell 2023. We all know the nonprofit sector is the nation's third largest private employer, and the nonprofit workforce is responsible for delivering almost 6% of the country's GDP. Our sector is a driving force for our nation. The healthcare of our workforce, one of the 4 ways in which IS assesses the overall health of our sector, has never been more important, and, truth be told, the health of our workforce today is not good. In this post-pandemic world, our workforce is tired, disheartened, and outnumbered by ever-increasing demands for our services and our skills. This cannot be our new normal. Please settle in for a conversation moderated by Independent Sector President and CEO, Dr. Akilah Watkins, that takes a hard look at the current state of our workforce and the steps we need policymakers and practitioners alike to take to ensure the well-being of our most precious asset, our people.
Welcome. Woo! So, I'm extremely excited to be having this panel in particular. But before we begin, let me just take a temperature in the room. How's everybody doing? I got to hear a little bit more from Dallas than that. Come on, y'all. How's everybody doing? Wonderful. So I am particularly excited to be exploring the future state of the nonprofit sector workforce. And we have an amazing panel today for you all to close out. As you all know, this week in Dallas, we have been learning about artificial intelligence, sector health. We've learned about compassionate leadership. And today, we are going to be focusing on the state of the nonprofit workforce. And so I am particularly interested in this topic because as I have been sharing with you all, I have been going around the country doing a listening tour and talking to philanthropic, nonprofit, and corporate sector leaders for the last year. And every room, every city, has all been talking about the workforce. And so some of the things that I've been hearing, and we'll talk a lot more about this, is where do we get people? How do we keep people? How do we train people and get them ready for leadership? We don't understand the current needs of the workforce, and I'm also hearing some structural issues that have changed. Healthcare premiums are really too high. A lot of our nonprofit employees don't have the necessary resources, or organizations are not set up to be able to provide retirement services or retirement matches for them. And so all of these challenges and issues continuously face and challenge us as a sector. The sector is the 3rd largest private employer in the country. That is comprised of about 12.5 million Americans. And so we have a very big task ahead of us. And so I'm excited to be in community today with this panel to begin to deeply understand what are the challenges facing the nonprofit workforce and what are the things we can do to help combat that. But before I get started, I want to first introduce Mr. Tim Delaney, President and CEO of the National Council of Nonprofits. Tim. Yeah.
I'm delighted to be with you. Just want to make sure, am I doing self-introduction or the program?
Yes. Tim, I would love for you to introduce yourself, and then we'll go right into your slides.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you. All right, folks. Tim Delaney, President and CEO of the National Council of Nonprofits. I get to work with you. We are the largest network of charitable nonprofits in North America. We stretch from coast to coast and border to border, and actually over the border, we've now extended into Canada. So what I'd like to do is go through some of our slides for about 20 minutes and start with the future of the state of the sector. During my time, I'm going to share with you why it matters, why the nonprofit workforce shortage matters, how the shortage shows up, what are the causes, and 3 bonus insights. So the information I'm going to be sharing is based on the results of our April 2023 survey. What we found is that the nonprofit workforce shortage remains a national crisis. We did a similar study in 2021. We hoped that things would have improved some. They have not, and we are still in crisis mode. Why does this shortage matter? At the National Council of Nonprofits, our operating principle is it's not about us. It's not about our state associations across the country. We love them, but it's not about them. It's not even about charitable nonprofits themselves. We're not a trade association. We are created to be champions for the public good. So we're working for the public, trying to make a difference. And that difference is the people of America. It's not about us, it's about the work getting done in communities across the country. So with that in mind, when you're talking to elected officials, when you're talking to business leaders, when you're talking to funders, when we're talking with ourselves within the sector, we need to be talking about it's the public that suffers. It's individual people who suffer. And again, elected officials don't care about charitable nonprofits. They care about whether their constituents are suffering. So we need to get that message out there loud and clear. So how does the workforce shortage show up? I was on a call last month with colleagues from English-speaking national networks from Australia and New Zealand up to Canada and over into the UK and Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And the #1 issue for them was workforce shortage. This is not an American challenge. This is a global challenge. This is a shortcoming that we are all going through. So we can't say people are picking on us. This is universal. Last week, I had the good fortune to be in Ottawa with a group of peers who are creating a National Council of Nonprofits network actually up in Canada. So we had provincial and territorial leaders. And the #1 issue that they kept talking about throughout their 2.5 days was nonprofit workforce shortage. But it's not just the charitable sector that's having this shortage. It's also the private sector and government. There's a shortage of fast food workers and nurses and pilots and retail sales and so on. And the public sector is suffering, but it's really the corporate sector that is able to pay bonuses, to recruit, to pay more. But the consequences are different when those shortages appear elsewhere. If McDonald's cannot get someone who can work the fries or flip the burgers, you might have to wait another 5 minutes in the drive-through line to get your dinner. But if you are someone who needs assistance from a suicide prevention center and you come to a nonprofit that says, gee, we're sorry, we had to close early today, we don't have enough resources to staff this thing up. Or consider if you are the single mom who's abused and with 2 kids standing in front of a domestic violence shelter in need of help and protection in Montana, and this is a true story, to be told that she needed to wait a month because that's how long the waiting list was for the domestic violence shelter in this small community. It's the people who are suffering, but it's also the nonprofit workers who are suffering. Imagine being there as the executive director of that domestic violence shelter or the remaining employees there who have to turn away people that they know desperately need their help. This is what the crisis amounts to. The consequences are way different when nonprofits don't have sufficient people to get the work done. So how does it show up? The data reveal, again, from our survey this year, that 3 out of every 4 nonprofits reported having job vacancies. Well, that abstract number of 3 out of 4, how does it compare with others? Well, in the business world, 1 out of 3 have shortages. And so our situation is more than twice as bad as for the corporate sector. And it's worse now than it was before. We have nonprofits reporting that they now have more vacancies today than they had pre-COVID. Why? Well, one of the reasons is we're unable to compete with the likes of Walmart, Target, and Starbucks. Our jobs are working with abused and neglected children. It's hard work. Who wouldn't want to make more money with less stress? The more corporate America raises the bar, the more the nonprofit sector is left behind, according to a nonprofit professional in North Carolina. The top 3 reasons for nonprofit vacancies. 3 out of 4 nonprofits reported it was salary competition. 2 out of 3 reported it was budget constraints and insufficient funds. And 50% reported it was stress and burnout. This is stress and burnout not because these people are weak. It's not because nonprofits employ people who are substandard. It's because these people are having to turn away other people in need. It's because the demands are so great. And the 4th worst is government contracts, where governments are not paying on time and breaching their agreements. The top 3 nonprofit job categories with vacancies are 3 out of 4, program and delivery, service delivery. We have almost half that are entry-level positions that are unfilled, and a third are administration. And so these are what CEOs are looking at and trying to deal with. How can you possibly deliver what's needed if you don't have the resources? The bottom line is nonprofits have far fewer staff to meet the increased demands for services. Sometimes that shows up because the people that nonprofits are relying on have cut back their range of services. They only offer 2 out of the 3 programs that they used to, or 2 out of the 7 they used to. They're cutting back on their hours and their locations. The nonprofit in Richmond that had 4 locations didn't have enough staffing, so they relocated to 2 locations. And those organizations then saw that people were no longer being served who couldn't get to their usual spots. And some nonprofits are permanently closing. So what are the causes? You'll note that all of these are external threats. I would describe the nonprofit community right now as brittle. And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, well, there was the pandemic. Folks, it didn't start with the pandemic. We need to look at a broader historical trend, which is the 2008 Great Recession. When it hit nonprofits with not just a triple whammy, but a quadruple whammy. We got clobbered. We have data showing that the states had not fully recovered from the Great Recession in 2019. A third of the states were still suffering. And so we didn't start the great pandemic at the starting point, all jazzed and ready to race and do our best. We went into it dragging our heels, already worn out and not fully recovered when we then got hit by the pandemic. And I'm so proud of how the nonprofit community raised itself and delivered for Americans. It was astonishing what you all pulled off. But it was, you did it when you were exhausted. So you were exhausted going into it, double exhausted coming out of it. And right now we're looking at the facts that demands are up, resources are down, costs are up, government grant making is antiquated and broken. Salary competition's up, burnout is ablaze. The Federal Reserve turned to us a couple years ago and invited us to help them with a national survey that they were doing on the state of the economy and what it was doing to local communities. Last year's survey found that 70% of responding nonprofits said that there was a higher demand for services. 43% reported that they were significantly higher demands for services. We've all seen how costs are up. Inflation ate away 13.5% of buying power just the last 2 years. You notice that government grants didn't go up by 13.5% to fill in the difference. Foundation grants didn't go up by 13.5% to cover the increased cost. I'm aware of 2 foundations that stepped up and put more money into their grantees, and they're heroes. It's not that the others aren't, but nonprofits are now again carrying greater burdens. And we're carrying greater burdens even in some particular areas. I don't know how many nonprofits in this room have had your accountants say, sorry, we can't do your audits anymore. We're going to move along because there's a shortage of accountants, and accounting firms keep consolidating, and they're charging through the roof right now if you can even find one. Resources are down. The mega gifts from billionaires have been masking the fact that charitable giving among regular Americans has been declining for 15 plus years. And so when the Chronicle of Philanthropy and other groups have screaming headlines, donations are up, this is wonderful, well, that might be the high number, but look at the distribution. That's where equity counts. The distribution is not going to the small to mid-sized nonprofits that Americans depend on, it's going to the big institutions. That's where the wealthy give. When people can give in their local community, they tend to take care of that local community more. That's why so many of us have been pushing for the universal charitable deduction. Now, to me, universal charitable tax deduction is a big mouthful, and people, because it's tax, you start having to think, and that's really challenging. I wonder if we'd have more success if we called it the All Americans tax credit, so that everybody could take the deduction to signal that everybody's entitled to it. That's what we need to be going for, making it universal for everybody, all Americans. Government contracting is broken. The nonprofit community earns about half of its revenue by performing for private fees for our services. We earn a third of our revenue by performing government grants and contracts. And yet, pre-pandemic and pre the Great Recession, we have government policies in place that where governments are not paying the full cost, they're not paying on time, even those states that have adopted laws that require governments there pay on time, then they stop writing the contracts and still expecting nonprofits to do the work. We have another equity issue in that the grants and contracts are designed for larger institutions and not for the regular nonprofits in disadvantaged communities. We have complexification on the front end of the application process and certainly on the back end of reporting. And governments are inflexible in times of crisis. There is some good news. There is federal legislation pending right now that is bipartisan and poised to move. We have the White House Office of Management and Budget that is reviewing its policies to make sure nonprofits are paid on time, are paid a minimum of 15% for indirect cost, and that's the minimum. And there will be an appeal process if governments fail to do that. And so there's great hope for reform on the policy side of the shop. Salary competition is up. Jose Andres, who's an American hero with the World Kitchen, and he also runs some fancy, wonderful restaurants in DC. On his private side, he's able to pay his employees and a bonus for just recruiting other people to come in and work the jobs. And we have a lot of challenges with other places. The Boston City Council invited us to go up and testify and about how they could do a better job with their ARPA funds. We heard story after story of nonprofits coming in that were testifying when we did, that were talking about how city and state government were capping the reimbursement rates for their employees at $13.50 or $13.79. And then driving home, those same employees would see billboards for a signing bonus from Hobby Lobby and from Target that would enable them to make a lot more money. And so if you're looking at getting paid $25 an hour versus $13.50, you're looking at what can happen for your family. Ultimately, people leave. They're burned out. And when they leave, then fewer people are doing the work of those who've been there before. Also seen some equity issues with remote hiring. We've heard from nonprofits in South Carolina, who are having real problems because corporations in Chicago and New York are hiring their people away and doing a lot of problems. And it's just wearing things out, where those employees then go work for the private sector, can work remotely, get paid a whole lot more, but there aren't enough people to then come in and fill the slots. Burnout is ablaze. I don't know if you all have been noticing, but the number of CEOs who are leaving and departing the last couple of years has been unprecedented. And one of the reasons is, as this Montana nonprofit executive reported, we just can't keep up with the need for fundraising, the increasing demands on our services and classes, the rates of pay that we need to pay people, and the cost of rent. Again, you're CEO, you're trying to make it all happen, and there just aren't the resources. So now I'm going to share some bonus insights for us all. For nonprofits, we need to be living our values. At the National Council of Nonprofits, one of our 5 core values is honoring the nonprofit workforce. Nonprofits and their employees should have the respect and the resources needed to get their work done. In our office, we practice what we advocate. Late last year, we received a grant from Fidelity Charity Trustees Initiative. They invested in us to turn around and reinvest in our network, in our state associations. They have trusted us to make wise decisions. This is a pilot program. It's a proof of concept of how well this can work. But of our 7 different programs that we have put together to push money out to our network, the very first one, on purpose, was to make sure that we're putting money into our network so that they can then be taking care of their own nonprofit workforce and the well-being of those people. Foundations, please join us in making sure that you're putting money into your own grantees to take care of the wellness. Give those grantees some special dollars to address the great need. Foundations, please live your missions. Phil Buchanan and his great team at the Center for Effective Philanthropy invited me to write an article, and in it, I thanked the funders who stepped forward in March of 2020 and thereafter who said, we will start giving more general operating support and we will stop all the nonsense of piles and piles and piles of applications and piles and piles and piles of reports, and we're going to get rid of those. We're doing that to get as much money out as we can to take care of the problem. And you know what? Look around. Society didn't collapse. They didn't have all that additional paperwork, but everything worked just fine. And that can happen again. So the Council on Foundations just deserves great credit for getting out there and being leaders in March of 2020 to get all the foundations to sign on to their special pledge. And Phil Buchanan, if you're still in the audience, thank you for your leadership in promoting foundations to give to nonprofits. Next, be angels. Get general operating support out there wherever you can. This is not directed at the Fords and the Motts and the Hewletts. They're already doing that. This is directed at the people in each of the states. Foundations, wherever you are, give to your local nonprofits. That's where the action is. They need that general operating support right now. Our top 4 policy solutions are reform of government grants and contracts, adopting charitable giving incentives, strengthening the public service loan forgiveness program, and increasing access and supports for affordable childcare. This last one is not to just support a subsector issue of helping nonprofits that are providing childcare. This is for not only nonprofits, but all of society. We need to take the burden off of moms. We need to take the burden off the families so that they can go to work. Employers, the private sector, need to understand the importance of this issue. And finally, we all need to walk the talk, commit to D&I. We asked the question, what are the practical solutions that you as nonprofits are adopting? And one of the top ones was diversity, equity, inclusion trainings and strategies. This is a workforce development issue. It pays off. And if you as an organization will adopt DE&I standards and apply them and live them, you will start attracting talent. You will start retaining talent. You can make a difference, but it's up to you to try to pull things together. And with that, Akilah, I will flip it back to you, and I'll take a chair.
Thank you so much, Tim. I will invite my other 2 guests, Tamisha Bridges Mansfield and Rodriga Ross. Yeah. So before we begin, let me give these 2 wonderful, lovely ladies an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Excuse me. Hi, everybody. I'm Tamisha Bridges Mansfield. I'm Vice President for Workforce and Regional Economies at Jobs for the Future. I can go a little bit more when we talk more.
Wonderful.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rodriga Ross, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I didn't pay him. I love him. Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the YMCA of Metropolitan Dallas.
Thank you. So we're going to start with a bit of reflection from Tim's presentation. It was full.
Yeah.
Tim shared some really important data, and Tim, thank you for that. One of the things that really resonated with me was the word brittle. And how the nonprofit workforce is described as brittle, and how these problems, according to Tim, didn't just start after COVID. I think that's an important piece you really try to drill, that they have been, they were a result of what has happened from the 2008 economic collapse of this country. And so and as you said, Tim, we as the sector were going into COVID already exhausted and had to show up to be there to support Americans. And so, Tamisha, let me start with you. Sort of, what are your reflections about what Tim shared?
Yeah, so I would say it's a couple of things. First, I thank you for that data, and I think what it raises for me is additional questions and insights, and that is actually where you get to good solutions, right? So as I was listening to what he was saying, the things that stood out to me were job quality issues. Right, and so how we think about job quality at JFF is we look at it across a bunch of different sectors, or a bunch of different areas, but the 2 pieces that stood out were the compensation issue, right, so the pay issue, and then the other area that we look at when it comes to job quality at JFF is this whole idea of agency and culture, which is really where well-being sits. And I think a lot of times when we talk about job quality, we often start at pay, which is very important, but there are other things that I think organizations, and for that matter, our culture, particularly as it relates to nonprofit organizations, really do and should need to pay attention to as it relates to well-being, how workers and people are valued for the contributions that they make, and then also how they're taken care of by the organizations that they work for, and in particular by their frontline supervisors. One of the things that we know is that when a worker or a person is treated with dignity, respect, and value by their frontline supervisor, the person closest to them, that can actually shape how they experience the work. And so I think that's something for folks to pay attention to. I would say the other things I think about it, in particular with JFF's work, is that, you know, the workforce and education ecosystem, which JFF works to kind of help catalyze, is that, you know, what we know is that we spend a lot of time talking about skills, right, that people need. But one of the things that we also realize is that people need more than skills. They need human services supports, what we call wraparound services in our space. And what we find is that we send folks to human service organizations to receive wraparound supports and then realize, oh wait, there's waiting lists.
Yeah.
Right? And folks can't access the care, the cash, the transportation, the whatever it is that they need that then will help them persist in their jobs. And so we're in this interesting space in the workforce and education ecosystem where I think we also have to pay attention to not just our space as nonprofit entities, but also how we relate particularly to the human service sector, because without that sector, the participants, the learners, and the workers that we care about can't actually thrive in the programs that we set up or that the jobs that we lead them to. So it is a space that I think we are having to care about and lean into more than I think we previously had, and I think that's something that came out for me as you were talking.
I really appreciate that. Great insight. Rodriga.
So for me, the first thing I thought about was, as leaders in nonprofits, if you happen to sit in a space where you can affect policies, practices, and procedures, how much are you being a gatekeeper to this information? Many times the experiences that we are having in nonprofit, particularly as it pertains to workforce development and how much we pay and what are those things we do to create cultures where people want to be a part of, people aren't doing it to us, we do it to ourselves, right? And what responsibility do we have as leaders in this space to say, that's not okay? To push back against charitable organizations who want you to have a 20% admin cap in order to be eligible to receive their funding, when we know that the work in nonprofits, your biggest expense is labor, right? And how do we get together and collectively say to the industry, to funders, how many gift cards and widgets do you all want me to buy?
I know that's right.
I'm going to spend the money where the greatest need is, and that is for the people who are delivering the services. And so as I was listening, right?
Yeah,
to
please, affirm it.
I'm not buying another Chick-fil-A sandwich. I love Chick-fil-A. Please don't tell Chick-fil-A that, right? But how much are we perpetuating some of this stuff internally because we know that is the landscape externally? And so as I was listening to him, I was like, what can I do to dismantle some of those systems that are perpetuating this stuff in my organization? Because like I said, it's not necessarily that folks are doing it to us. Sometimes we're doing it to ourselves. What is the narrative that we tell ourselves that we don't think the work is this important, or that we get the folks who perhaps couldn't make it in the for-profit world, right? And so they're not as valuable, and the things that they bring to the table are not as valuable. I would venture to say we get the folks that are even more talented that will work, because in nonprofit, in for-profit, it's one person to do that one job. In nonprofit, how many people in here do one job?
Right.
But you get paid for one job, right?
Right.
And so changing that narrative and being unapologetic and saying that about, heck yeah, we pay our nonprofit professionals XYZ because they deserve it, right? They bring a caliber and a skill set that clearly their counterparts in other industries are making that and more. And so that's what I was kind of getting from that as Tim was talking.
No, absolutely. So one of the other points that Tim raised in his presentation, and I heard this over and over again on my listening tour, is that people are exhausted, right? Our workforce is exhausted. And I would love to know your insights on the exhaustion that the sector is feeling?
Yes, primarily because for nonprofits, many of the times you are dealing with the work around human service and quality of life that in the best of circumstances would break a person down, right? You're helping people navigate through challenging times and healthcare crises and lack of access and just debilitating, challenging issues. And when you do that in a space where you're doing it and it's just you for hundreds of people, when you're doing it in a space where when everyone else was expected to kind of go and sit down and regroup, you were expected to charge into the fire.
Right.
When you're doing it in spaces where like my grandmother says, you have to make a dollar holler, right?
That's right.
And do more with less. My grandmother had doozies, y'all. And you have to do more with less. Heck yeah, folks are exhausted. We are, and in the same instance, many times you are experiencing the very same things that you are helping people to navigate, right? Like
that.
I personally am out here every day trying to fight for systemic change and anti-racism work as a black woman with black sons
That's right.
and a black husband.
That's right.
So yeah, I'm tired. I buy shoes a lot because I'm tired.
I know that's right.
And those are you.
That's right.
Right? I buy shoes, but people don't. They don't take into consideration that weariness that comes with this work because the people who are dug down and so passionate about it, it just seems so effortless
I know.
for them. Yeah.
And I think it's part of like the setup. I mean, I've been in social, and I'm a social worker by training. I've been in nonprofits in different ways and spaces my entire career. And I think it's this assumption in nonprofit, right? That people come to the work because they're just so good and they just so care so much and they're gonna just give their best. And yes, we do all of that. And then I wonder how much of that narrative is then ingrained into how we're funded.
Yeah.
Right? And into the expectations that are then put upon the sector at the same time, without realizing that while that may be true, there's also this thing in social work called a wounded healer.
That's right.
And we have to like acknowledge that, for good or bad. But when people come into this space out of a reason or an incentive to do good, either based on their own trauma or their own lived experience, you have to take care of people in a very different way. And it doesn't matter if you're doing it as a frontline worker or as someone who is in the C-suite who is still thinking about, oh my God, these systemic barriers are never ending and this is why I'm in this work. How we take care of people in that space matters. And I don't think our systems, particularly as it relates to reimbursement, as it relates to grant making, take that into consideration. And then it piles up at all levels. And I think what happens is the weariness. I think we also sometimes forget the weariness of leaders.
Yeah.
Because that is also weariness. And sometimes when we as leaders don't take care of ourselves, it pushes down on supervisors that then push it down on frontline staff. And so for me, it's this like, how do we have different systems and level of care for nonprofit workers, no matter what the spaces that they sit in? And then what are the ways that that can be paid for, supported, what have you, whether it's by particularly by the philanthropic sector?
Yeah, please, Tim.
If I could marry a couple of ideas here. One is just, for many, and certainly in the social services, it's a trauma industry. We're dealing with trauma so much, and it may not be the accident on the street. It's just humans trying to survive, trying to get through complex systems, and we need to recognize that and again, take it from the high level down to the human level and be talking about that, which gets to the narrative point. And one of our problems is too often we are talking at foundations, or we're talking at policymakers, or we're talking at the media. We need to be talking to the nonprofit community. We've got 12.5 million people who work at charitable nonprofits. And yet, when Indiana University did its study recently, it found that of all the people they surveyed, only 6%, actually a little less than 6%, could identify a nonprofit that provided services to them this last year. And I think it's because nobody knows what a nonprofit is. We don't talk to our employees about it. It just kind of is. Everyone who works at a nonprofit knows that there's somebody who's trying to raise funds, but otherwise we're just doing the work. We need to turn internally and be educating the third largest workforce in America.
That's right.
To get them on board to understand that individually we're kind of lost. We're lost in the shuffle. But collectively, if we come together, we can have voice and we can be heard to change some of these antiquated, broken government contracting and grant-making programs that are built on reimbursements. What is this? We're going to be paying to deliver these services, and you're not even paying 100% on what it costs to deliver the services, and then we have to wait for you to reimburse us. And along the way, you often change the standards of reporting, and so we have to incur additional expenses just to try to keep up. And then you don't pay us on time, and we've documented where there are some nonprofits that have been paid 2 years late.
Yeah.
We're subsidizing government.
That's
What's
right.
wrong with this picture? We need to be lifting our voices and demanding change. But it's not going to happen with Washington Slicks. It's going to happen when we have a narrative that reaches out
right.
and we talk about some of the trauma, some of the real life stories, not just of those that we're serving, but also our own employees.
That's right.
I would encourage you all to look at our value and adopt it as your own. Take care of your own nonprofit workforce. These people are invaluable.
That's right. That's right. I mean, wow, that was powerful.
Yeah.
That was really powerful, and that's a great sort of lead up to our next question. I mean, what I heard is both structural, our reimbursements, our narratives, how people actually see the sector, the fact that the sector hasn't even defined that it's a sector. But I also heard about the wounded healer and the psychic trauma it takes to work in this sector day in and day out, and then on top of that, not being able to be compensated and get the sort of benefits you need. And with that being said, I mean, one of the other challenges that Tim talked about, and we know this because we're all facing it, is this pipeline into the sector of talent, right? And so the sector right now has about 4 different generations working in it. We know that baby boomers will be retiring over the next 10 years. And we don't know if we have the pipeline in place to replace, because we've had vacancies before COVID. We've had vacancies for the last decade of 15 plus years. And so what do we do about this pipeline of talent? How do we get younger people to sign up to be part of this sector, considering all the challenges we laid out?
That's actually, I think it's 2 things. It's one, how do you get young people into jobs in general?
Yeah.
That's like a question in and of itself. And I think it's actually twofold. I think part of it is when you say nonprofit, it's so big, right? But there's arts, there's youth development, there's housing, there's all these other niches. And so part of it is, when I think about it from a workforce development perspective, is like, how do you get people curious, young people curious about the niches of nonprofit, and then use that as pathways to introduce young people to the sector. So maybe there's a young person who has an interest in like architecture or housing or something like that. It's like, how do you then incent them and introduce them to, hey, there's like a community development organization in your neighborhood that might need some volunteer assistance. So I think part of it is like, how do we rethink introducing young people to the sector and to the individual niches of the sector that feed their passion or their curiosities? But I also think one of the things that we see that is encouraging in a different kind of way when it comes to young people is like, young people hustle. right? And a lot of the like innovation and efficiencies that are happening across sectors are coming from young people who are social entrepreneurs, who are developing funky little apps that we all have on our phones. And part of it is like, how do you actually tap into that creativity of hustle culture that young people have that may actually help create different efficiencies within organizations? So there might be things in your community or young people in your community who have creative ideas around, I don't know, starting an app around connecting folks to transportation services. There's different like ways, I think, to tap into young people's creativity that can be additive into our spaces where they may not have to come and work for us, but their ideas may actually be able to help us be more efficient in the services that we deliver. So I think it's about taking a two kind of pronged approach of how we see and think about young people and how we tap into their curiosity and their hustle and their drive and desire to work.
No, that was really powerful. Usually when we are talking about younger people, it can devolve into intergenerational sort of warfare as opposed to harnessing talent, right? So, Rodriga.
So I think as you're talking about intergenerational warfare, there's some work to be done no matter which generational strata you kind of identify with in understanding that young people and how they interface with the workforce is very different than how maybe our boomers and such. And so
Definitely different from the way I did.
Way different, right? And acknowledging that and being okay with it, because the world they are inheriting is fundamentally different than the world that you may have inherited at the same time. And so this whole idea of work-life balance is gone. It is work-life integration. And how do you speak to young people in ways that feed that idea of work-life integration? It's not so much about where you work and how you show up at work all the time. It is what you produce, right? What is happening because you are working in the space. And how do you help build a plane when you fly it? Young people, particularly the ones that I interface with, they are eager to learn. And they're eager, I agree 100%, Tamisha, that they come up with really creative, innovative ways to do things more efficiently. And how are you allowing them to do the work that needs to be done to serve the communities, to help to fulfill your mission, and to help them develop into better leaders? And I really think that nonprofits, we think about leadership development and skill development as an afterthought. Like, if you have a little bit of time left, I'll send you to this class, or maybe once a year for 4 hours, I'll let you go to a conference. But those are the spaces and places where people build their networks, they build their skills, they hear about different and innovative things. And so we have got to create spaces where young people or entry-level folks or those aspiring to greater in the nonprofit space, right, can build themselves. We want the best version of them, but we expect them to do that on your time, some other time, not right now, not this time, but come back to me in a couple of years all well-rounded and built out. And so nonprofits can, and sometimes that looks like, particularly for your smaller nonprofits, getting together, right? And maybe doing some exchange work or sharing knowledge or giving young people or entry-level leaders the opportunity to take lead and stretch assignments and that kind of stuff. But also take into account that the way people work is very important to them now, whereas that wasn't necessarily the conversation pre-pandemic. You know,
Absolutely.
You go into the office, it's 8:30, you get your skinny soy latte, extra hot, no foam, right? And you sit down, you do this for XYZ amount of hours, and then you go home. But that's not the way that people are most productive now, and sometimes that's okay. Yeah. And how do we evolve as an industry to let people live in the way that is most productive and help us get to what it is that we're trying to get to as an organization?
And can I add one other thing? I think it's also for those of us, and I think about this a lot, who've been in nonprofit and who have like risen, right, in the ranks. It's like, what is it that we needed? Like, I recently rewatched Insecure. And the first couple of seasons of Insecure, when Issa was like toiling away in this crazy nonprofit.
That she hated.
That she hated.
That was so me. Oh.
And that was me.
So me.
Exactly. And so part of it is like, wait a minute, like I have been that worker
Yes.
who
Yeah.
was working in a nonprofit, who was not treated awesome, and who had my, right? And what did I need? What was it that I needed that I can provide to someone else from a mentorship perspective, right? And that, I think we forget about that sometimes as we move up or move around in the space, that we also have a bit of an, not a bit, but we also have an obligation to help create the right experience where people want to stay in the space.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Tim, please.
We often talk about the pipeline,
Yeah.
and we always seem to, in my head, it's a clean water pipeline. And so we've got this clean water coming in, and we focus on the input at the beginning of someone's career. And one way to help make sure that there is a fresh input of water from that point is like Dr. Ashcraft brought a whole bunch of students from ASU to this conference to expose them to water. And that's great for the ASU folks who are here, but what about those who aren't? What about those who you could be inviting to your own organizational gatherings so that people can be more exposed and understand? So that's part of the pipeline. I've been around for a long time. I didn't enter the nonprofit pipeline from the very beginning. I started my career at a big law firm, became a partner, then I worked as senior positions in state government. Then I created my own nonprofit, and so looking at this long stream, I entered in through a different pipe to the larger pipeline that was going.
Right.
And so I think we need to also adjust our thinking. It isn't just the young people who are so important, but there are other entree points that we need to be looking at and considering. And the other point that I have been worried about more recently is watching the outflow of all these distinguished leaders of the nonprofit community, the CEOs, the senior vice presidents, and so on, who are leaving and departing, worn out, exhausted,
Yep.
full of knowledge, full of passion that has been beaten down. How can we start looking at how we rescue some of that knowledge so that when they depart, they don't leave the sector permanently? They don't want to get dragged back in and be in charge of budgets and fundraising, but they do have a commitment. What are we doing for those people? We're watching, tens of thousands of leaders who are leaving. Look at the job wanted postings.
Absolutely.
People are looking for the leaders who to replace those who are leaving. What are we doing for those who are leaving? How can we help them land safely because they haven't been compensated fairly? They haven't been receiving
Right.
the retirement plans and so on. And so what can we do to help them continue on to give back to the community? So I think we need to be having our discussions about the pipeline from the beginning to the side entry points later on, and then what are we doing with the outflow so that we can then recapture that in an environmental sort of way and recycle it back through in a productive fashion to help the sector as a whole.
I think that's important, Tim, for a lot of different reasons. One of the beautiful things about the sector is that there's so many ways that people can enter it. So many ways. You can leave the sector. I, mother of three, I left the sector for 6 years to be a stay-home mom, right? And then I was able to come back. And the second largest sort of volunteer group in this country are people over the age of 55, right? So how do we engage people at all ages? And I really sort of appreciate you sort of highlighting that point, that investment in human capital doesn't just happen when people are young.
Yeah.
Right? That we have the opportunity to invest in people throughout the continuum of their lives. And so when we think about where are some of these bright spots, right? Like where are some of the places in the sector as it relates to the nonprofit workforce that give you hope? I got to call on somebody now.
If I don't make eye contact, maybe she
I'll start. I think, and this goes back to what Tim was saying, one of the things that gives me hope is that we're in this really interesting space where worker voice matters. And I am often curious about how we utilize worker voice in the context of nonprofit spaces. One of the projects that we have at JFF that's just getting started, but when folks on my team were developing it, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait till this comes out. But it's a project that we're doing in California where we're working with 8 nonprofits, largely in the workforce space across the state, where we're working with 18 of their frontline staff as participatory researchers, where they are talking to their colleagues, their coworkers about their job experiences to learn and to build and to co-design with their leadership solutions to make their workplaces better. And it's this interesting notion of, I think, what we all know and believe intrinsically about our clients, that you find your solutions to those that are closest to the problem. And how do you turn that around inside of our organizations to design the solutions that they need to improve our talent practices? And so that type of energy around worker voice within this space is actually really, really encouraging, because I think that's how we get to better options. And I think it also takes a certain level of vulnerability. Anytime you do worker voice or worker power, it takes a level of vulnerability from those in power to be able to listen and not just be like, that was a nice touch point survey, because I know we've all done those and wondered, where does this information go? But to actually have the requirement that if you're going to have your staff go through this process, you need to sit at the table with them to hear them and then to design something better. And so I'm encouraged. Hopefully this time next year we'll have some results that we can come back and share. But that kind of energy, willingness, curiosity within our spaces is something that gives me hope.
Wonderful.
I'm encouraged by convenings like this, because what I know is that it can be really isolating when you're in your part of the world, right, a part of the universe, and you're saying ouch, and you think you're the only one that's saying ouch. But when you get in spaces like this and you get to sit with others who are having those same experiences, and then you hear amazing data that's supporting what you know to be true anecdotally, people begin to talk more, and the energy level rises, and the complacency goes down, and your ability to kind of get together and all begin to sing the same song gets better. And that is how the narrative begins to change. That is how the wildfire spreads. It takes that one match, and then poof, the telephone game is on. So when folks go back and they talk about some of the things that they talked about at this conference, inevitably this discourse will pop up, and then that creates another chain in the conversation, and another, and you start to find like-minded folks, and you find people who are experiencing the same thing, and you all get excited. And so I think that's what excites me the most, is that folks in the nonprofit sector, number one, we're interfacing outside of our discipline more, and we're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. We know our value. We understand our value proposition to society, and we're becoming to be unapologetic about what it is that we desire and what we need in order to keep doing the things that we love. And so I'm really excited about that.
Thank you. Tim.
I have a tendency to live the first part of our mantra, which is, what are the problems? What are the solutions? Let's get them done. And so as we're working on that, we've got to be knowing about the problem. So I don't know that anyone has said this in front of me, but it seems like I'm Delaney Downer, that I come in with this data that just shows how bad it is, because we've got to recognize it is bad. And then we need to work together to come up with solutions, and then we've got to get them done. We've got a lot of the solutions already identified. We need people to roll up their sleeves and work collectively. At the National Council of Nonprofits, we do 3 things. We connect, we champion, and we inform. And the very first thing we do is we connect. And I appreciate so much, Rodrigo, the notion of when people come together. That's where I find my hope, is when people come together, we can then take action. We can then communicate and inform each other and take action. That's how we get change. And we can often do the Band-Aid help that is needed. You can't avoid doing the Band-Aid. But we've got some gigantic systems changes that we've got to tackle, and we can't do them alone. We've got to work together and work on our connections and bring people together, like here at Upswell, so that people can connect and call each other up and exchange cards or whatever, so that we can remain in communication, so that we can collectively make a difference. So I'm hopeful that we still have the capacity, despite the last several years, to work together with hope.
I want to say thank you, panel, for this wonderful discussion. The nonprofit workforce will be a major priority for independent sector, and I'm really excited to have this group of esteemed colleagues on the stage as we think about how we work together to make sure that we take care of the people that take care of Americans. So, with that being said, I want to thank the panel again, and we are officially concluding this panel. So please, another round of applause for the panel. We're also officially closing Upswell. This is the last panel of the conference. And I would like to say this is my first Upswell in person. And let me just say I have felt deeply supported and cared for. And I want to thank everybody for coming out and supporting independent sector. Right now, I am calling up all of the staff of independent sector right now. And also, thank you, panel.
Thank you.
That's it. Turn this mic off. That was really good. Thank you. Oh, right now with the pan, can we do that afterward? You want to bring the whole staff up? I want to bring the whole staff up right now. Thank you. I want to just say that when we think about a conference and we think about, I'm up here a lot and people have been so gracious and caring with me, but I have to say none of this is getting done without these amazing individuals on the IS team, and I really want to give them an opportunity to get their flowers now. So we're going to call up all the staff. I think they're coming up right now. All right, let's bring them. Oh, shit. Tony Fleo, where are you? We're coming. Anthony, Tony. Did I miss Tony? Where's Tony Fleo? Oh, there's Tony. Is he mic'd up? Okay, he's not. Tony, please just share a couple of words.
I love you. You're amazing. You've been incredible to work with. What a joy.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wish you the best of luck in this new role. You're going to do fantastic and do great things for our sector. So thank you.
Appreciate you, Tony. I appreciate you. Thank you. And I also want to thank the SVP staff. Anthony, thank you. I want to thank all of independent sector staff. Thank you all. Please, please, thank you. Thank you, everyone.